Story: The Vanishing of Emochi. Forward. My name is Alex Hartman. For 3 years, I was the host and lead investigator for the podcast Forgotten Frequencies, a series dedicated to unearthing historical mysteries and unsolved cases. I pursued stories with a relentless, almost arrogant sense of curiosity. I believed every locked door had a key, every shadow was cast by something tangible. I was wrong. The following account is the complete unedited story of my final investigation. I am compiling it not for broadcast, but as a warning. Some doors should remain locked. Some shadows are not cast by anything at all. They are the substance. If you are reading this, you have somehow gained access to my private files. I implore you, stop here. Forget the name you are about to learn. Forget the sound I am about to describe. Let the silence lie. Part 1. The Digital Breadcrumb. It began, as so many modern obsessions do, in the pale blue light of a computer screen. It was 3 a.m. in my Boston apartment, a time when the city slept, and the internet was a playground for insomniacs and obsessives like me. I was deep diving, falling through the rabbit hole of obscure forums dedicated to Japanese urban legends, looking for fresh material for the show. I'd covered the popular ones: the slit-mouthed woman, the Red Room curse, the tales of the Aokigahara forest. I needed something new, something raw and untouched. That's when I found it. It wasn't a story. It was a fragment, a single, cryptic post on a long-dead message board from the early 2000s. The user, Kagewatcher, had posted only once and never logged in again. The post, translated from choppy Japanese, read, "They speak of ghost towns, but they don't know. Not an evacuation. Not a plague. A removal. Ask the old men in the Chugoku Mountains about the village that is not there. Ask them about Emochi. Ask them about the night of the long shadow and the bell that holds the echo." Emochi. The name resonated with a strange, dull hum in my mind. It felt ancient. I ran a search. Nothing. I tried different spellings, different kanji combinations. Nothing. I searched Japanese historical archives, census records, digital maps. Emochi did not exist. It was a ghost of a ghost, a name without a place. Any other person would have dismissed it as a simple creepypasta, a bit of online fiction. But the phrasing, a removal, the bell that holds the echo. It didn't feel like fiction. It felt like a carefully worded testimony. The seed of obsession was planted. For weeks, Emochi became my white whale. I spent every waking moment digging. I cross-referenced vanished villages with Chugoku Mountains. I searched for folklore related to bells and shadows. My producers at Forgotten Frequencies were getting impatient. I was missing deadlines, consumed by a lead that was leading nowhere. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: the digital archives of a small prefectural university. I found a single footnoted reference in a disgraced professor's academic paper from 1978. The paper was titled "Ritualistic Syncretism and Agrarian Taboos in Pre-Meiji Japan." The professor's name was Dr. Kenji Tanaka. The footnote was brief, almost an afterthought. Further research into localized animistic practices is impossible due to official stonewalling. My inquiries into the alleged 1956 Emochi incident were met with censure and academic dismissal. Records of the village, including its name and location, have been expunged. The official narrative is a mass landslide, but no geological survey supports this. The truth, I suspect, is far more unsettling. The Emochi incident, 1956. This was my anchor. A name and a date. I found out that Dr. Tanaka was still alive, living in seclusion in Kyoto. My producers, sensing a real story at last, reluctantly greenlit a research trip. They thought I was chasing a Cold War-era cover-up, a hidden chemical spill, something grounded and rational. I didn't correct them. I couldn't. How could I explain that I wasn't just chasing a story? I was chasing a feeling, a gnawing dread that had coiled itself in my gut ever since I first read the name Emochi. Part 2. The Keeper of the Secret. Kyoto was a city of contradictions, a place where serene temples stood in the shadow of neon-lit skyscrapers. Finding Dr. Tanaka was like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a Zen garden. He lived in a small, traditional house in a quiet, non-tourist district, a home walled off from the world by a high fence and overgrown bamboo. When I first knocked, no one answered. I knocked again, calling out his name. A shuffling sound came from within, and the door slid open a crack. A pair of dark, paranoid eyes peered out. He was a small, wizened man, his face a roadmap of worry. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Dr. Tanaka? My name is Alex Hartman. I'm an American journalist." The door began to slide shut. I put my hand on it, gently. "I'm here about Imochi." The name hung in the air between us like a charged particle. His eyes widened, a flicker of old terror crossing his face. He studied me for a long moment. Then, with a sigh of profound weariness, he slid the door open. "Come in," he whispered. "Do not speak its name so loudly." His house was a fortress of paper. Books and manuscripts were stacked to the ceiling, leaving only narrow pathways between them. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, ink, and stale tea. He led me to a small room where we sat on tatami mats. "Why do you seek this place?" he asked, his hands trembling as he poured us green tea. "I believe it's a story that needs to be told," I said, trying to sound professional and detached. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Told? You think it is a story? Young man, a story is a thing that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Imochi has no end. It is a wound in the fabric of the world, still weeping." For the next 5 hours, Dr. Tanaka spoke. He was a man unburdened, releasing a pressure that had been building for nearly 30 years. He told me the official story first. In the autumn of 1956, the small, isolated mountain village of Imochi, home to approximately 117 people, was scheduled for a regional census. When the officials arrived, they found the access road blocked by a minor, recent rockfall. When they cleared it and reached the valley where the village should have been, they found nothing. "Not ruins, Mr. Hartman," Tanaka stressed, leaning forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "Not rubble from this supposed landslide. The valley was pristine. The trees were untouched. It was as if the village, the houses, the fields, the people had been neatly excised from the landscape. The government sealed the area. They manufactured the landslide story, classified the incident at the highest level, and systematically erased every record of Imochi's existence. They paid off families of those who had relatives in the village, threatening them into silence. But something was left behind," Tanaka continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "One thing, or rather, one person. He told me about a man, a young forester named Kaido, who had left Imochi the day before the incident to sell lumber in a larger town. He was supposed to return the following evening. When he came back to the familiar path that led to his home, he found it ended abruptly in an empty, silent valley. He went mad," Tanaka said, his gaze distant. "Utterly, irrevocably mad. They found him a week later wandering the woods miles away. He was emaciated, catatonic, clutching something in his hand." "What was it?" I asked, my recorder capturing the slight tremor in my own voice. "A Suzu bell," Tanaka said. "A small, round brass bell, the kind used in Shinto shrine rituals. It was dented and tarnished, but he would not let it go. For the rest of his short life, in a psychiatric hospital in Okayama, he did nothing but sit and rock back and forth, whispering the same phrase over and over again." "What was the phrase?" Dr. Tanaka looked at me, his face grim. "Kage wa koe o namu, suzu wa kodama o daku." It means, "The shadow drinks the voice, the bell holds the echo." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, washed over me. It was the echo of the forum post. This was real. "But what does it mean?" I pressed. "What happened to them?" Tanaka sighed and pulled a locked wooden box from beneath a stack of papers. He opened it and produced a single, yellowed notebook. "This is a copy of a village elder's journal, recovered from a relative who lived outside the village. It contains the reason. Imochi was a poor village. For years, they had suffered from failed crops, from famine. They were desperate. They decided to perform an old, forbidden ritual, a ritual that was never meant to be performed. What kind of ritual? It was called the Okagura, the Great Devotion. But it was a perversion of a traditional ceremony. It was not meant to ask the gods for a blessing. It was meant to compel the land itself, to make a bargain with something much older than the gods, something that sleeps beneath the mountains. The journal speaks of a specific night, the autumnal equinox, when the day and night are of equal length. They called it the night of the long shadow. They believed that on this night, the veil between worlds was thin, and a great enough offering could command a great reward. What was the offering? Tanaka closed his eyes. The ritual had a terrible taboo. It must be performed in absolute silence. No cry, no word, no sound, from the moment the sun sets until the moment it rises. The journal says they believed any sound made would be consumed, that the silence itself was the vessel for their offering. But someone or something broke the silence. The last entry in the journal is frantic, almost illegible. It reads, "The bell rang. The shadow is not long. It is everything. It is drinking the..." The entry ends there. He gave me a hand-drawn map, a copy he had made decades ago, showing the location of the Lost Valley. "I give you this not as a blessing but as a burden," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "I am too old to carry it. Go if you must. But know this, you are not looking for a lost village. You are looking for proof that a place can be unmade, that reality is thinner than you imagine. And if you hear a bell in a place where no bell should be, you run. You do not look back. You just run." Part 3. The Silent Valley. Armed with Tanaka's map and a heart full of a toxic cocktail of fear and ambition, I flew to Okayama. I hired a local guide, a young, pragmatic university student named Emmy, who was skeptical of my historical documentary, but happy for the generous pay. I told her we were looking for the site of an old, undocumented settlement. I did not mention the name Imochi. The journey took us deep into the Chugoku Mountains. The civilization of Japan peeled away, layer by layer. The bullet trains became local lines, the paved roads became gravel tracks, and finally, the tracks disappeared altogether, leaving only overgrown footpaths. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and chlorophyll. The incessant drone of cicadas was a constant, oppressive soundtrack. On the third day of hiking, Emmy stopped. "This is strange," she said, consulting her GPS. "According to the topographical data, there should be a ridge here, a steep incline, but it's a valley." I looked at Tanaka's hand-drawn map. An X marked a spot labeled the False Ridge. We had arrived. Before us lay a small, bowl-shaped valley, perfectly nestled between three large hills. But it was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The ever-present buzz of the cicadas, which had been our companion for days, stopped at the valley's edge, as if it had hit a glass wall. Inside the valley there was nothing. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no hum of insects. It was a profound, vacuum-sealed silence that pressed in on the ears, creating a low internal hum. The second thing was the vegetation. It was unnaturally lush, the green almost painfully vibrant, yet static. The leaves on the trees did not stir, though a breeze was picking up on the ridge where we stood. It was like looking at a high-resolution photograph of a forest, not the real thing. "I don't like this place," Emmy whispered, her skepticism finally cracking. "It feels dead." "We're just going to take a quick look," I said, my own voice sounding small and foreign in the oppressive quiet. We descended into the valley of Imochi. The ground was soft and spongy, covered in a thick carpet of moss that seemed to swallow the sound of our footsteps. And there, scattered amongst the unnaturally green trees, were the houses. They were not ruins. They were perfectly preserved, as if they had been placed there yesterday. Traditional wooden farmhouses with thatched roofs, weathered by time but structurally intact. Doors were left ajar, windows were open, but it wasn't a ghost town. Ghost towns feel abandoned. This felt paused. We entered the first house. My breath caught in my throat. On a low table sat 2 bowls of rice and a plate of pickled vegetables. Chopsticks were laid neatly beside one bowl, as if the diner had just gotten up to answer the door. A fine, almost imperceptible layer of something like gray dust covered everything. But it wasn't dust. It didn't move when I blew on it. It was more like a permanent discoloration, a stain on reality itself. We moved from house to house, and the same chilling tableau was repeated everywhere. A child's wooden toy horse lay on its side in the middle of a dirt path. A woman's kimono was laid out on a sleeping mat, ready to be worn. In another house, an inkstone and brush sat on a low desk, a half-finished character painted on a sheet of rice paper. It was a village frozen in the last second of its existence. 117 lives, stopped mid-breath. Emmy, who had been documenting everything with a digital camera, suddenly lowered it. "The pictures," she said, her voice tight with panic. "Look." She showed me the screen. The photos were corrupted. Each one showed the interior of the houses, but they were distorted, filled with visual noise and long, dark streaks that emanated from the corners of the rooms, like shadows that had been captured on film. My own audio recorder, however, was working perfectly, too perfectly. When I played back the recording of our own whispers, I could hear the background silence. It wasn't an absence of sound, it was a presence, a low, subaudible frequency that my equipment was picking up, a sound that felt like it was actively devouring other noises. At the center of the village, just as Tanaka's map indicated, was a small, dilapidated shrine. It was more ancient than the houses, made of dark, moss-covered stone. A stone torii gate marked the entrance, and beyond it was a small, wooden honden, the main sanctuary. This was the heart of the wrongness. The air here was cold, a stark contrast to the humid mountain air, and the silence was deepest here, so absolute it felt like a physical weight. It was here, at the foot of the shrine steps, that we found it. Lying in the moss was a single dented brass Suzu bell. I felt an irrational surge of terror, an instinct screaming at me to obey Tanaka's warning and run. But the journalist, the obsessive, won out. I had to know. Kneeling down, my hand shaking, I reached for the bell. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, a jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm, and a sound, faint and thin, whispered through my mind. It wasn't a sound my ears heard, but one that bloomed directly in my consciousness. It was the sound of 100 voices screaming at once, but with the volume turned all the way down to nothing. A silent, psychic shriek of pure agony. I recoiled, stumbling backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Did you hear that?" I gasped to Emmy. She looked at me, her face pale. "Hear what?" "There's no sound, Alex. There's nothing." That's when I saw the journal. It was tucked inside a small offering box at the shrine's base, miraculously preserved. It was the original, the one Tanaka had only seen a copy of, the Elder's Journal. Part 4, the last entry. As the sun began to dip below the mountain ridge, casting long, distorted shadows across the silent valley, I opened the journal. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate. I read the final pages aloud, my voice a sacrilege in the crushing stillness, with Emmy translating the more complex passages. The journal chronicled the village's desperation. A blight had ruined their rice for 2 years running. The children were starving. The government offered no aid. The elders, in a secret council, decided to revive the forbidden Okagura. The elders who remember the ritual from their grandfather's tales are all gone, the elder wrote. We follow the old texts, but the words are obscure. They speak of an offering of pure silence to the sleeping one below. A bargain of sound for sustenance. We will try. May the ancestors forgive our hubris. The next entry described the preparations. They chose the night of the autumnal equinox. Every villager was instructed. From the last light of sunset to the first light of dawn, not a single sound could be made. No speech, no cough, no cry of a baby, no footstep. They would all gather in their homes and wait in total, absolute silence. The shrine maiden, a young girl named Asa, would be the only one at the shrine to strike a single, resonant chord on a sacred osuzu at the exact moment of sunrise, to signal the end of the ritual and the sealing of the bargain. Then came the final entry. The handwriting was jagged, chaotic, written with a trembling hand. Equinox night. The sun has set. The silence is absolute. It is a living thing. The air is thick with it. I can feel the presence in the ground beneath us. It is listening. It is waiting. We must hold our nerve. We must hold our silence. A few lines down, the script devolved into a panicked scrawl. A sound. No. No. From the woods. A child? Lost? A baby's cry? No, it was a bell. A small bell, like a cat's collar. One sharp, clear ring. Not the sacred bell. Something else. Wrong. It broke the silence. Oh gods, it broke the pact. The final words were barely legible. The ink smudged, as if by a tear or a drop of sweat. The shadow from the western mountain. It did not grow longer as the sun set. It detached. It is not a shadow. It is a mouth. It is flowing into the village. It is silent. It is drinking the air. It is drinking the light. I hear my wife screaming in the next room, but there is no sound. The bell rang. The shadow is not long, it is everything. It is drinking the ink stroke trailed off the page. As I finished reading, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air settled deep into my bones. Emmy was staring, white-knuckled, at the western hill. "Alex," she breathed. "The shadow." I looked up. The sun had just sunk below the peak of the tallest hill, and its shadow was creeping across the valley floor toward us. But it wasn't a normal shadow. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was darker, a pitch black that seemed to absorb the color from the moss it touched, leaving behind a trail of dull gray. And it was moving too fast, unnaturally fast. It didn't stretch, it flowed, like a spill of black ink. Then we heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a single, clear, metallic tink. The sound of a small bell. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound that broke the pact. My blood ran cold. The psychic scream I'd felt from the Suzu bell now made a horrifying kind of sense. It was a recording. An echo of the last sounds the village had ever made, trapped within the metal. The bell holds the echo, the great shadow. The thing the elder had written about was no longer just flowing. It was surging toward us. The world seemed to tilt. The edges of my vision began to go gray and fuzzy, the color bleeding out of my perception. The profound silence was replaced by a deafening pressure in my ears, the feeling of being deep underwater. I saw the trees at the edge of the shadow begin to dissolve. Their vibrant green turned to that dead, stained gray, their forms flickering like a bad video signal, before seeming to be wiped away from existence. The process was utterly silent. The shadow drinks the voice. It wasn't just drinking the sound, it was drinking everything. The light, the color, the matter. It was unmaking the world. Run. The word was a primal scream torn from my throat, but it came out as a choked, soundless gasp. The air was too thick to carry it. We didn't need words. Emmy was already scrambling back up the slope, her face a mask of pure terror. I grabbed the elder's journal and the cursed Suzu bell from the ground. The evidence, the proof, and fled after her. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I could feel the cold of the encroaching void on my heels, an absolute nothingness that sought to erase us. We burst out of the valley's edge back into the world of sound. The drone of the cicadas crashed over us like a tidal wave, the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We ran, blindly, crashing through the undergrowth, not stopping until the sun had completely vanished, and we collapsed, gasping and sobbing, miles away from that silent, hungry place. Part 5, The Echo. We never spoke of what we saw. We hiked back to civilization in a shared, traumatized silence. Emmy took her payment and disappeared from my life, and I can't blame her. I returned to Boston a different man. The ambitious journalist was gone, replaced by a haunted shell. I have the evidence, the audio recordings of the impossible silence. The corrupted photos showing the dark stains on reality. The Elder's Journal. The Suzu bell. The bell sits on my desk now, locked in a lead-lined box. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I think I can hear it. Not with my ears. I can feel it. A faint, psychic vibration. A silent scream, trapped for eternity. The echo of 117 souls being unmade. I cannot release this story. Dr. Tanaka was right. It's not a story. It's a contagion. To tell the world about Emochi would be to draw a map to it, to invite others to look into that abyss. And what if, by observing it, we give it power? What if the shadow is still there, waiting, hungry? My name is Alex Hartman. I went looking for a forgotten place, and I found a hole in the world. I am no longer a storyteller. I am a gatekeeper, a warden of a terrible secret. My only job now is to ensure the silence of Emochi remains absolute. Because I know what happens when it's broken. I heard the bell. I saw the shadow drink the world. And I know, with a certainty that freezes my soul, that if it is ever disturbed again, it will not stop at the edge of the valley. Story: The Echo in the Hypocenter. The air in Nagasaki, even decades after the fact, carries a certain weight. It's not something you can measure or define, but you feel it in the quiet reverence of the parks, in the solemn gaze of the elderly, in the very bedrock of the rebuilt city. It's the phantom limb of a memory, an ache that has become part of the landscape. And nowhere is that weight more palpable, more suffocating, than within the walls of the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I was a junior archivist there for 3 years. To most, it sounds like a morbid profession, a daily immersion in humanity's darkest hour. But for me, it was a duty. My own grandmother, my Obasan, was a hibakusha, a survivor. She was a young girl living on the outskirts of the city on that fateful August morning. She never spoke of the Pika dawn, the flashbang, but its shadow lived in the tremor of her hands and the far-off look that would sometimes claim her eyes. My work was my way of understanding the silence she left behind. The museum is a modern subterranean structure designed to lead visitors downward, deeper into the event, as if descending into the underworld itself. During the day, it's filled with the shuffling feet of tourists and the hushed whispers of students on field trips. The low, ambient hum of the climate control system mixes with the occasional gasp or stifled sob as people confront the exhibits, the rosaries fused into a blackened lump of glass, the school uniforms scorched and tattered, the photographs of vaporized shadows seared onto stone. The most haunting artifact, for me, was always the clock. A simple wall clock, its hands frozen forever at 11:02 a.m. It wasn't just a broken machine. It was a tombstone for a moment in time. But at night, the museum transforms. When the last visitor is departed and the heavy glass doors are locked, the silence that descends is of a different quality. It's not empty, it's full. It's a listening silence, thick with the unsaid, saturated with the residue of a million screams that were silenced before they could even be uttered. My story, the one I am compelled to tell, begins on a sweltering Tuesday night in late July. We had just received a new collection of donated artifacts, mundane items made profound by their survival, a warped metal bento box, a child's leather shoe, a collection of letters that were never sent. My supervisor, the stern but respected Mr. Ishikawa, had tasked me with the initial cataloging. It was a meticulous, time-consuming process, and he'd authorized overtime. "Tanaka-san," he'd said, his voice clipped and formal, "ensure every piece is documented before the official assessment. The provenance of these items is fragile." I was happy for the extra hours. The archive, located in the museum's deepest level, was my sanctuary. It was a sterile, climate-controlled room, lined with rolling metal shelves that held the physical memories of the dead. The smell of old paper, treated leather, and preservation chemicals was a strange comfort. By 9 p.m., the building was deserted except for myself and the night watchman, an old-timer named Sato-san. Sato was a man carved from granite and melancholy, another hibakusha who, like my grandmother, wore his past like an invisible cloak. He'd make his rounds every 2 hours, his heavy footsteps a rhythmic, reassuring presence in the echoing quiet. I was working on the letters, translating the delicate, spidery script with white-gloved hands. They were from a young woman to her fiancé, a soldier at the front. Her words were full of hope for the future, plans for a small home, dreams of the children they would have. The last letter was dated August 8th, 1945. It ended with, "I will wait for you forever, my love." It was never sent. The ink was slightly blurred, as if from a single teardrop. I felt a familiar pang of professional sorrow, the cold, detached grief that came with the job. I sealed the letter in its acid-free sleeve and made a note in the digital log. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound. Faint, distant, and utterly out of place. It was the soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a small ball being bounced. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I strained my ears, listening past the hum of the servers and the air conditioning. The museum was a concrete bunker. Sound didn't travel well between floors unless it was loud. This was soft, intimate. It sounded like it was coming from just outside the archive door, down the long, sterile corridor. Thump, thump, thump. My heart began to beat in time with the sound. It had to be Sato-san. Maybe he'd dropped his heavy mag light. But the sound was too light, too playful. I shook my head, a nervous laugh catching in my throat. I was tired. My mind was playing tricks on me, colored by the tragic letter I'd just read. The human brain seeks patterns. I told myself it creates meaning from noise. I went back to my work, forcing my focus onto the warped bento box. An hour later, as I was photographing the box from multiple angles, the lights in the archive flickered. They dimmed for a long second, casting the room in a sickly amber twilight. Then buzzed back to their full, sterile brightness. A power surge, I reasoned, common enough in the summer. But a cold dread, slick and oily, was beginning to pool in my stomach. I felt a sudden, intense chill, the kind that has nothing to do with the ambient temperature. The climate control was precise, unwavering. Yet goosebumps erupted on my arms, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The feeling of being watched was so intense, so palpable, that I physically turned around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. There was nothing, just the long white corridor stretching into the gloom, lit by the cold, spaced-out emergency lights. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin. "Sato-san?" Only the hum of the building answered. I decided to take a break. I needed coffee. I needed to walk around, to remind myself that this was just a building of concrete and steel. I locked the archive and made my way to the staff break room on the main exhibit floor. To get there, I had to walk through a portion of the museum itself. The main hall was cavernous and dark, the exhibits sleeping under a blanket of shadow. The emergency lighting cast long, distorted silhouettes. The twisted steel girders of a factory looked like the ribs of some great dead beast. The life-size diorama of a post-blast street, with its mannequins covered in rags and burns, was always unsettling. At night, it was pure nightmare fuel. Their blank, plastic eyes seemed to follow me as I passed. As I walked past the display of children's artifacts, I stopped dead. There, in the center of the polished floor, sat a small, red rubber ball. It wasn't part of any exhibit. It was a modern toy, something a child might have brought in that day and accidentally dropped. The cleaning crew should have found it. Sato-san should have seen it. But it was nearly 11 p.m. There was no reason for it to be there. It was the same kind of ball whose sound I'd imagined, or heard an hour earlier. My blood ran cold. I stared at it, my mind refusing to connect the dots, even as my gut screamed that this was impossible. I approached it slowly, cautiously, as if it were a venomous snake. I nudged it with the toe of my shoe. It rolled a few inches and came to a stop, inert. Just a ball. A lost toy. I picked it up. It was cool to the touch. I told myself I put it in the lost and found. I clutched it in my hand, its simple reality a strange counterpoint to the growing irrational fear in my mind. As I turned to continue towards the break room, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I was at the far end of the hall, near the entrance to the section dedicated to the Urakami Cathedral, the Grand Catholic Church that was annihilated in the blast. For a split second, I saw the silhouette of a small child, a little girl with a short bob haircut, peeking out from behind a large pillar. I blinked and she was gone. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling now. The sound was swallowed by the immense space. I was no longer trying to rationalize. I was scared, deeply primally scared. My hand tightened on the red ball. Was I losing my mind? Was the grief that permeated this place finally seeping into my sanity? I all but ran to the security office, a small, brightly lit room just off the main lobby. Sato-san was there, sitting in his worn chair, watching the bank of CCTV monitors. The screen showed the empty halls and corridors I had just walked through. "Sato-san," I gasped, leaning on the doorframe. He looked up, his weathered face impassive. "Tanaka-san, you look like you've seen a ghost." He said it casually, a common figure of speech, but it hit me like a physical blow. I heard something. A ball bouncing. And I found this. I held up the red ball. And I thought I saw a little girl over by the cathedral exhibit. Sato-san's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of recognition, of resignation. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and slowly pushed himself to his feet. "Come," he said, his voice low. "I will make us some tea." He didn't question me. He didn't call me crazy. And that, more than anything else, terrified me. In the small, cluttered break room, Sato-san prepared 2 cups of green tea with the practiced, steady hands of a man who had performed this ritual thousands of times. He didn't speak until he had set a steaming cup in front of me. "You are not the first," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "Most of the night staff, over the years, they see things, hear things. Most of them quit. The ones who stay, we learn not to talk about it." "So it's real," I whispered, the words feeling foolish and childish. "The ghost, is it real?" "Ghost is a Western word," he said, taking a slow sip of his tea. "We have other words. Yurei, a faint spirit, an echo. This place is not haunted, Tanaka-san. It is wounded. What you are experiencing is the scar." He told me the story then. It wasn't in any official record or historical text. It was part of the museum's own secret lore, passed down between the few who stayed long enough to learn it. He spoke of a presence, one that was felt more often than seen. A child. They didn't know her name. They called her Kage no Ko, the shadow child. "She is most active in the summer," Sato-san continued, his eyes distant. "Around the anniversary. She doesn't mean any harm. She is just lost, looking for her mother." He told me about other incidents. A security guard who heard a child's laughter through his radio, only to be met with static when he replied. A curator working late like me, who found a child's dusty footprints leading to the display of melted tricycles, only for them to vanish before her eyes. Cold spots that moved through the halls. The faint, heartbreaking sound of weeping that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "The ball," I said, looking at the red toy still clutched in my hand. "Is this hers?" Sato-san looked at it, and for the first time, a deep sadness crossed his face. "Perhaps. Sometimes things appear. Things that do not belong to the living, and do not belong to the dead. They are echoes, manifestations of a longing so strong, it punches a hole through time." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The fear in my chest was still there, but it was now mingled with a profound, aching sorrow. This wasn't a monster. This was a victim, a child, frozen in her final moments of terror and confusion, replaying them for eternity. Sato-san finished his tea. "My rounds," he said, standing up. "You should go home, Tanaka-san. The dead can wait. They are not going anywhere." I didn't go home. I couldn't. His story hadn't scared me away. It had given me a purpose. I was an archivist. My job was to uncover stories, to give names to the nameless. I couldn't bear the thought of this little girl being known only as the shadow child. Driven by a strange mix of terror and compulsion, I went back to the archive, but I didn't work on the new acquisitions. I opened the museum's central database of victims, a vast and heartbreaking digital cemetery. I started cross-referencing. I searched for children, specifically girls between the ages of 5 and 8, who were confirmed deceased in the Urakami district, near the cathedral. The list was horrifyingly long. Page after page of names, each one a universe extinguished. I narrowed my search. I looked for any personal accounts, any diaries or letters from survivors that mentioned a child playing, a child with a ball, a child waiting for her mother. For hours, I dug through digital files, my eyes burning from the screen's glare. The museum was silent around me, but it was a loaded silence now. Every creak of the building, every hum of the machinery made me jump. I kept the red ball on the desk beside me, a bizarre talisman, and then I found it. It was buried deep in the transcript of a testimony given in the 1970s. The account was from a woman named Hisako Maeda, who had been a teenager on August 9th. She had survived, but her younger sister had not. Her testimony was fragmented, haunted. She described the morning, the heat, the drone of the B-29, which they called Bisan. She spoke of her little sister, Akiko. Akiko was 6 years old. She loved her red ball more than anything, Hisako's testimony read. That morning, Mother sent me to the market. Akiko wanted to come, but Mother told her to stay and practice her letters. She was crying, so Mother gave her the ball to play with in the garden. She told her, "Be a good girl, Akiko-chan. Mama will be right back." I left. I looked back and saw her, bouncing that little red ball in the dust by the gate. She was wearing the blue and white yukata Mother had just made her. When the flash came, I was far enough away. When I finally made it back home, there was no home. There was no garden. There was nothing. I called for her. I called for Mother. I never found them. Only on the stone steps where our gate used to be, there was a shadow, the shape of a small child, holding a ball. My breath hitched in my chest. I read the words again and again. Akiko. Her name was Akiko. A wave of emotion so powerful it was physically painful washed over me. I wasn't just an archivist anymore. I was a witness. The abstract horror of the museum had just been given a name and a face. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the main exhibit hall above. It sounded like shattering glass. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed my phone and the red ball and ran out of the archive, my footsteps pounding down the corridor. "Sato-san," I yelled. I burst into the main hall and skidded to a stop. The air was frigid, impossibly cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. My exhalations plumed in front of me as white vapor. Nothing appeared to be broken. No glass was shattered, but the feeling in the room had changed. The oppressive weight had intensified tenfold. It was heavy, active, and full of a despair so profound, it felt like it was physically crushing me. And then I saw him. Sato-san was standing motionless in the center of the hall near the giant, pillar-like photograph of the mushroom cloud. He was staring at something just past it, his face a mask of ashen horror. "Sato-san, what is it?" I asked, my voice a ragged whisper. He didn't answer. He just slowly raised a trembling hand and pointed. I followed his gaze. My eyes adjusted to the gloom and I saw her. It wasn't a fleeting shadow this time. She was standing near the replica of the destroyed Urakami Cathedral altar. A little girl, no older than 6. Her form was translucent, shimmering at the edges like a heat haze, but she was undeniably there. She wore a simple blue and white patterned yukata. Her hair was in a short, neat bob. She was turned away from us, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sound of a child weeping, thin and ethereal, filled the vast, cold space. It was a sound of absolute heartbreak. It was Akiko. The logical part of my brain shut down. All the skepticism, all the attempts at rationalization, evaporated into pure, unadulterated terror and pity. This was real. This was happening. I took a hesitant step forward. The red ball felt heavy in my hand. "Don't," Sato-san rasped, his voice tight with fear. "Don't get closer." But I couldn't help it. I felt drawn to her, pulled by the sheer gravity of her sorrow. Akiko-chan? I whispered her name. At the sound of her name, the weeping stopped. The little girl slowly turned her head. What I saw will be burned into my memory until the day I die. Her face was a pale, shimmering mask of grief. Her eyes were wide and dark, like empty wells. But that wasn't the horrifying part. As she turned fully towards us, the shimmering light of her form seemed to intensify, to flicker like a faulty projection. And for a single horrifying second, the illusion of the little girl dissolved. I saw what the bomb had done to her. Her skin was gone. Her yukata burned away to reveal a horror of charred flesh and exposed bone. One side of her face was a melted ruin, her eye socket a black weeping hole. It was an image straight from the most graphic photographs in our archives, the ones we kept hidden from the public. It was the face of the apocalypse. I cried out, stumbling backward, my legs giving way. I fell hard onto the polished floor, my phone skittering away into the darkness. The vision lasted only a second before she was once again the shimmering, translucent child in the blue and white yukata. But now she was looking directly at me. Her dark, sad eyes were fixed on the red ball in my hand. She took a small, hesitant step forward, then another. She began to drift towards me, her feet not quite touching the floor. She wasn't malicious, she wasn't angry. She was just a lost child who had seen something she wanted. "She wants the ball," Sato-san breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. What was I supposed to do? Give a ghost her toy back? What would happen? Would she vanish? Would she take me with her? Akiko raised a small, shimmering hand towards me, her expression one of desperate, silent pleading. As she got closer, the cold intensified. It was a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was freezing me from the inside out. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. And then, the world dissolved into light and noise. It wasn't the museum anymore. For a terrifying, eternal moment, I was there. I was in Urakami on August 9th, 1945, at 11:02 a.m. A silent, blinding flash of pure, white magnesium light bleached the world of all color. It was followed not by a sound, but by a pressure, a physical fist of force that crushed the air from my lungs. The sound came a heartbeat later, a deafening, world-shattering roar that was the sound of a city being ripped apart at a molecular level. I felt a phantom heat, an impossible searing heat that peeled the skin from bone. I heard a million voices cry out at once and then fall silent. I smelled ozone and dust and burning, everything. It was a sensory assault, a psychic echo of the blast, channeled through the small, tragic spirit in front of me. It was the memory of her death. I screamed, squeezing my eyes shut, pressing my hands to my ears to block out the impossible sound. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I was back on the cold floor of the museum. The roaring was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of the building. Sato-san was kneeling beside me, shaking my shoulder. "Tanaka-san, Kenji, wake up!" I opened my eyes. The hall was empty. The intense cold had receded, leaving only the normal, air-conditioned chill. Akiko was gone. I was still clutching the red rubber ball. My knuckles were white. I was shaking so violently I could barely sit up. "What was that?" I sobbed, the tears coming now, hot and fast. "Oh God, what was that?" "It was her," Sato-san said, his own face pale and beaded with sweat. "It was her memory. I have never felt it so strongly." He helped me to my feet. We stood there for a long time, two men shaken to their very souls, alone in the vast, silent heart of Nagasaki's grief. There was nothing more to say. We had borne witness. I never stayed late at the museum again. I couldn't. I finished my contract and took a position at a university library in Kyoto, as far from that lingering sorrow as I could get. But I never forgot. How could I? I carry the memory of Akiko's memory with me every day. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see her, a little girl in a blue and white yukata, her eyes like dark wells of sorrow, forever waiting for a mother who will never return, forever trapped in the echo of the flash. I left the red ball there that night. I placed it gently on the floor of the exhibit, near the display of the melted tricycles. It seemed like the right thing to do. It was a small, inadequate offering to a ghost named Akiko, a tiny anchor of reality in her world of unending horror. The Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum is a place of history, a place of learning, a warning to the future. But it is also a tomb. And some tombs, I now know, are not silent. They weep. They remember. And sometimes if you listen closely in the dead of night, you can still hear the faint, lonely sound of a little girl, bouncing a red rubber ball, waiting. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see her, a little girl in a blue and white yukata, her eyes like dark wells of sorrow, forever waiting for a mother who will never return, forever trapped in the echo of the flash. I left the red ball there that night. I placed it gently on the floor of the exhibit, near the display of the melted tricycles. It seemed like the right thing to do. It was a small, inadequate offering to a ghost named Akiko, a tiny anchor of reality in her world of unending horror. The Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum is a place of history, a place of learning, a warning to the future. But it is also a tomb. And some tombs, I now know, are not silent. They weep. They remember. And sometimes if you listen closely in the dead of night, you can still hear the faint, lonely sound of a little girl, bouncing a red rubber ball, waiting. Story: The Silence of the Goto Sea. They say the sea doesn't keep secrets. They're wrong. The sea is the greatest keeper of secrets there is. It swallows them whole, digests them in its black, crushing depths. And sometimes, just sometimes, it regurgitates a piece of one, a fragment of a nightmare, leaving it for the sun to bleach and the gulls to mock. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I served 35 years with the Japan Coast Guard, and I've seen what the sea can vomit back up. I've towed in vessels crippled by typhoons, plucked fishermen from the jaws of a squall, and chased smugglers through the labyrinthine islands that pepper our coastline. But nothing in all those years prepared me for the winter of 2015. Nothing prepared me for the silence. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late November. The air had that sharp, crystalline bite to it, the kind that promises a bitter winter. The sky was the color of lead, and the Goto Sea, usually a dazzling turquoise, had turned a bruised, sullen gray. I was at the Nagasaki station, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea and contemplating the sweet bliss of retirement just a few months away. My partner, a young, eager officer named Ryo Sato, was the one who took the report. "Tanaka-san," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too crisp. He was always like that, a coiled spring of ambition and procedure. "We have a report from a squid fishing fleet, unidentified vessel drifting approximately 20 nautical miles northwest of the Goto Islands. No AIS signal, no radio contact." This wasn't entirely unusual. We got reports of rogue fishing boats, often from China or Korea, that had strayed or suffered engine failure. It was typically a long, cold, and tedious job to tow them back. "Have they given a description?" I asked, not looking up from my tea. "Wooden vessel, old," they said. "Dark hull. Looks like a fishing boat, but not one of ours." They hailed it multiple times, no response. They said, "It feels wrong, Tanaka-san." Wrong? I finally looked at him. Ryo was a good kid, but he had a flair for the dramatic. "The sea is a dangerous place, Ryo. Everything about it can feel wrong on a bad day. Get the coordinates, we'll take the Hayabusa out." The Hayabusa was our patrol vessel, a fast and sturdy craft that had been my second home for over a decade. As we cleared the harbor, the relative calm gave way to the restless chop of the open sea. The wind howled, whipping spray across the windows of the bridge like handfuls of gravel. For 2 hours, we sliced through the gray waves, a tiny, defiant speck of white against an immense and indifferent canvas. Ryo was at the radar, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Should be close now," he muttered. "The fleet said they were moving on. The current is pulling it southeast." And then I saw it. It wasn't on the radar yet. Too small, too low in the water. A dark sliver against the horizon. As we drew closer, the word Ryo had used came back to me. Wrong. It wasn't just a boat, it was a carcass. A skeletal derelict. its timbers bleached by salt and sun, its paint peeling away in leprous patches. It was a North Korean fishing boat, a Chokobae. I'd seen pictures. They were called wooden coffins for a reason. Barely seaworthy vessels, pushed out into treacherous waters by a desperate regime. "There she is," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "My God," Rio whispered, his binoculars pressed to his eyes. "It's in terrible shape. There's no one on deck." We circled the vessel cautiously. It was about 15 meters long, with a low, crude cabin, and a single mast, where a tattered flag, or what was left of one, clung stubbornly. The name on the bow was painted in faded Choseongol, the Korean script. I couldn't read it, but the characters looked like angry black scratches against the decaying wood. The boat rode low and heavy in the water, lolling sickeningly with each swell. It moved with a dead weight, a finality that made the hairs on my arm stand up. There was no sound but the shriek of the wind and the slap of waves against its hull. It was the most profound and unnerving silence I have ever experienced. It wasn't an absence of noise. It was a presence. A heavy, listening silence. Coast Guard vessel Hayabusa to the unidentified vessel. Rio's voice boomed over the loudspeaker, cracking slightly. "This is the Japan Coast Guard. Do you require assistance? Please respond." The silence answered. "Again," I ordered. He repeated the call, in Japanese, English, and then a halting, textbook Korean. The silence held its ground, mocking our powerful engines, our modern electronics, our very presence. "Okay," I said, pulling on my heavy gear. "We're going aboard." "Aboard?" Rio looked at me, his eyes wide. "Tanaka-san, procedure dictates we observe from a safe distance until we can confirm the situation." "The situation," I said, checking the clip on my sidearm more out of habit than anything else, "is that there is a potential hazard to navigation, and possibly souls, in distress. We're going. Get your kit." The air grew colder as we launched the rigid, inflatable boat. The 5-minute ride across the churning water to the ghost ship felt like an hour. The closer we got, the more details resolved themselves, and the more my stomach twisted. The boat wasn't just old, it was wounded. Deep gouges scarred its hull, not from rocks, but from something else. They looked like claw marks. Giant, widely spaced claw marks. And the smell. It hit us when we were still 10 meters away. The familiar, briny scent of the sea was overpowered by a sweet, cloying odor of decay, mingled with the metallic tang of rust and something else. Something acrid and unfamiliar, like burnt wires and old fear. We came alongside, the inflatable bucking against the wooden hull. The side of the Korean boat was slick with a dark, slimy algae. I reached up and grabbed the gunnel. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, and felt strangely soft, waterlogged and rotten. I pulled myself up and over, my boots landing on the deck with a wet thud. The deck was a nightmare. A tangle of old nets and frayed ropes lay in heaps, half frozen in pools of brackish water. A scattering of dead fish, their eyes like milky pearls, were strewn about. But it was the cabin that drew my eye. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of absolute blackness in the gray daylight. Rio clambered aboard behind me, his face pale. "What do you think happened? Engine failure? Starvation?" "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Starvation is a slow, creeping thing. This place felt like it had been host to a sudden, violent convulsion of horror. I drew my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a clean cone through the gloom. I moved toward the cabin door. Every creak of the deck under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I nudged the door with my foot. It swung inward with a low, groaning protest. The smell intensified, a physical force that made me gag. It was the smell of death, but layered, complex. It wasn't just human decay, it was something else. I swept the beam of my flashlight into the cabin, and the world fell away. It was a small space, no bigger than a walk-in closet, and it was full. They were there. The crew. 5 of them. But they weren't just dead. The word dead is too simple, too clean. They were arranged. One man was slumped against the far wall, his head thrown back, his mouth open in a silent scream that had been frozen on his face for weeks. His eyes were gone, pecked out by gulls or crabs, leaving 2 dark, weeping sockets. Another was sprawled on the floor, his arms outstretched as if reaching for something. A third was crammed into a corner, folded into an impossible, broken posture. But it was the other 2 that broke my composure. They were seated at a small, rickety table in the center of the cabin. They sat opposite each other, as if in the middle of a conversation. Their heads were bowed, and their hands were resting on the table. Between their hands lay a book, a log book. This was wrong, terribly wrong. Victims of starvation don't arrange themselves so neatly. They fight, they claw, they huddle together for warmth. They don't sit down for a final, polite chat as death takes them. Rio made a choked sound behind me and stumbled back onto the deck, retching over the side. I couldn't blame him. The sight was an obscenity. I forced myself to step inside. The cold in the cabin was a living thing. It was far colder than the air outside, a deep, penetrating cold that felt like it was emanating from the very wood of the ship. My breath plumed in front of me, thick and white. I moved my light over the bodies. They were emaciated, their skin stretched like yellow parchment over their bones. Classic signs of starvation. But there were other signs too. Their fingernails were broken and bloody, as if they had been clawing at the walls. And on the exposed skin of their arms and necks were strange marks. Not bruises or cuts. They were dark, almost black, and looked like frostbite, but they were patterned, branching out like Lichtenberg figures, the patterns lightning makes when it strikes sand. My gaze fell on the logbook. It was a simple, cheap notebook, its cover warped by damp. It was open. The script was Korean, hurried and spidery. I couldn't read it, but I could see the progression. The early pages were filled with neat, orderly characters. As the pages went on, the writing became frantic, slanted, and chaotic. The last few pages were barely legible, a mad scrawl that dug into the paper. On the very last page, there was no writing. There was only a drawing. It was a crude, childish sketch, done in what looked like a mixture of ink and blood. It depicted a ship, their ship, on a dark sea. But below the ship, in the water, was a shape. It was vast and amorphous, with a multitude of swirling, shadowy tendrils reaching up towards the boat. And in the center of this swirling mass were eyes. Dozens of them. They were just simple circles, but they were filled with such a malevolent, knowing intelligence that a jolt of pure, primal fear shot through me. I reached out a gloved hand to take the book. As my fingers touched the cover, a sound echoed through the cabin. Tap. I froze. It was a small sound, sharp and distinct. It came from the hull, from beneath my feet. Tap, tap, tap. Rio. I called out, my voice tight. Did you hear that? His voice came back, strained. Hear what, Tanaka-san? I'm calling it in. We need forensics, a recovery team. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was louder, more insistent. It was coming from directly under the cabin floor. A frantic, rhythmic tapping. My mind reeled. It couldn't be. Everyone was dead. I looked at the bodies, their silent, screaming faces, their broken forms. They weren't moving. I swept my light across the floorboards. They were dark with grime and damp. And then I saw it. In the corner, behind the folded body of one of the crewmen, was a small hatch, its iron ring handle flush with the floor. The tapping was coming from there. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, trickling down my spine. Was it possible? Had we missed someone? A survivor, trapped in the hold? The thought seemed absurd. How could anyone have survived this long in these conditions? But hope, however irrational, is a stubborn thing. Rio, get in here. There might be someone alive. He appeared at the doorway, his face ashen, but his sense of duty overriding his fear. What? Where? I pointed the flashlight at the hatch. The tapping, it's coming from there. We looked at each other. The tapping continued, a desperate, urgent rhythm. SOS, my brain registered. ... .. Someone down there knew Morse code. Together we moved the broken body of the crewman. The corpse was light, shockingly so, and stiff, with an unyielding rigor mortis. As we shifted it, its head lolled, and one of its empty eye sockets seemed to stare right at me. We got it clear and knelt by the hatch. The iron ring was rusted tight. I put my fingers through it and pulled. It wouldn't budge. "Help me," I grunted. Rio added his strength, and together we heaved. The hatch resisted, then gave way with a screech of protesting metal and a shower of rust. It swung open, revealing a square of perfect, impenetrable darkness. The smell that rose from the hold was 100 times worse than the cabin. The thick, suffocating stench of bilge water, rotten fish, and something else. The smell of the deep, cold earth. The smell of a grave. The tapping had stopped. "Hello," I called down, my voice echoing in the confined space. "Is anyone down there? We're the Coast Guard. We're here to help." Only silence answered. The heavy, listening silence had returned. I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated a small, foul space, half flooded with black, oily water. Crates and fishing gear were piled up against the sides. There was no one there. "There's nothing," Rio said, his voice trembling with relief and confusion. "But the tapping," I began. But my words died in my throat. My light had found something. At the far end of the small hold, half submerged in the filthy water, was a wooden crate. The lid was nailed shut, but the wood of the crate, on the side facing us, was covered in scratches. Long, deep scratches, splintering the wood from the inside. As I stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing, a single large bubble broke the surface of the black water. Then another. The water began to churn, not from a current or the rocking of the boat, but as if something large was stirring beneath it. "Tanaka-san," Rio whispered, his voice choked with terror. "What is that?" The black water began to recede. It wasn't draining away. It was being drawn back, pulled down as if into a great unseen lung, and as the water level dropped, it exposed what had been lying on the floor of the hold. It wasn't a man. It was a body, yes, but it was hideously transformed. It was swollen and bloated, the skin a pale greenish white, like something that had been submerged for a very long time. But it was also unnaturally gaunt in places, as if something had been feeding on it from the inside out. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at sickeningly wrong angles. But the worst part was its head. It was tilted back in the oily sludge, and its mouth was wide open, stretched into a ghastly, impossible grin. And from that gaping maw, a long, thin, black tendril, like a strand of seaweed or a dead eel, was slowly, deliberately retracting back into its throat. I realized with a surge of absolute soul-shattering horror what we had heard. The tapping hadn't been a survivor. The thing in the hold had been making the sound. It had been using the body. It had been luring us in. A sound bubbled up from its throat, a wet, guttural clicking, and then its head began to turn. Slowly, jerkily, it turned towards us, and its eyes opened. They were not human eyes. They were wide, round, and perfectly black, without iris or pupil. They were the eyes from the drawing in the logbook, the eyes of the deep, and they fixed on me with an ancient, malevolent intelligence that knew my name, my fears, and the exact temperature of the blood in my veins. "Get out!" I screamed, shoving Rio back toward the door. "Get out of the ship, now!" We scrambled out of the cabin, falling onto the deck, gasping for clean air. We didn't look back. We lunged for the side of the boat, half falling, half jumping into our inflatable. I fumbled with the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key. The engine roared to life on the second try. "Go! Go!" Rio yelled, his face a mask of pure terror. I slammed the throttle forward, and the inflatable shot away from the ghost ship. As we sped away, I risked a single glance back. In the dark doorway of the cabin, a figure was standing. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its form indistinct and wavering, like heat haze on a summer road. It just stood there, watching us go. And I could feel its gaze on my back, cold and heavy as a tombstone. We didn't speak on the way back to the Hayabusa. We couldn't. The horror was a physical presence between us, a third passenger in the boat. Once back on the safety of our own vessel, we sealed the hatches and pushed the engines to their maximum, leaving the wooden coffin to its silent vigil in the gray, angry sea. My official report was a work of fiction. I wrote that we found a derelict North Korean fishing vessel with 6 deceased crew members. Cause of death: presumed starvation and exposure pending autopsy. I mentioned the hold was flooded and inaccessible. I made no mention of the tapping, the scratches, the thing in the water, or the figure in the doorway. Who would believe me? They would have sent me for a psychiatric evaluation, ending my career in disgrace instead of retirement. Rio, bless his terrified soul, backed my story without question. We never spoke of what we truly saw. We didn't have to. It was seared into our minds. They sent a recovery vessel a day later. They towed the ghost ship to a secure port. The official story, released to the media, was brief. A ghost ship, a dead crew, a tragedy of a failing state. The autopsies were inconclusive, citing advanced decomposition. The bodies were cremated without ceremony. The logbook was taken as evidence, and I managed to get a friend in intelligence to send me a translation of the last few pages. The translation confirmed my deepest fears. It was not a log of fishing coordinates and weather patterns. It was a diary of madness. Day 42. The engine is dead. The last of the food is gone. Kim-san sees his wife on the waves. He cries for her. The sea is calm today. Too calm. The water is like black glass. Day 45. Jiangxi died in the night. We gave him to the sea. We thought it would be a mercy. But when we put him over the side, he did not sink. He floated, and something pulled him under. Not a shark. It was fast. A shadow. Day 50. The hunger is a fire in our bellies, but there is a new hunger now, a fear. We hear things at night, a scratching on the hull, a voice that whispers on the wind. It promises food. It promises home. It lies. Day 53. Park tried to swim for it. He screamed that he could see the lights of Japan. He was mad. We heard him scream for a long time after he jumped into the water. It was not a scream of drowning. Day 58. It came aboard last night. We didn't see it, but the cold. A cold that freezes the soul. Choi is gone from his bunk. Only his boots remain. There are wet footprints on the deck that lead to the rail, and then stop. The final entry was almost illegible. Day 61. It is in the hold. We trapped it. We put Liesi's body in there with it as an offering. It is quiet now, but we know it is there, listening, waiting. It has shown us things, the deep places, the sleeping things. The sea is not empty. The sea is full. It is a hungry God, and we are its sacrament. It knows us now. It will never let us go. I retired 2 months later. I moved as far from the coast as I could, to a small house in the mountains of Nagano. But it's no use. I can still hear the sea. Sometimes, on a quiet night, when the wind sighs through the pine trees, I can hear the slap of waves on a wooden hull. I can feel the cold of that cabin seeping into my bones. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see them. The wide, black, knowing eyes of the thing that woke up in the hold of that ship. They say the sea doesn't keep secrets. They're wrong. It does. And the worst secret of all, the one I have to live with every day, is that the sea knows how to wait. It found those desperate men from North Korea. It lured us in with a dead man's tapping. And it looked at me. It saw me. And a part of me knows, with a certainty that is colder and deeper than any ocean, that I am not one of the secrets it has forgotten. I am just one it hasn't come to collect yet. Story: The Terraphonic Scream of Hashima Island. Prologue: The Siren Call of Silence. There are places on this earth that have swallowed stories. Not gentle bedtime tales, but ravenous, jagged narratives of sweat, blood, and sorrow. These places, often left to the quiet judgment of time and tide, don't just hold memories, they metabolize them. The pain seeps into the foundations, stains the concrete, and becomes part of the very air you breathe. They develop a voice, not of words, but of profound, resonant silence. And for a man like Kenji Tanaka, silence was the most alluring sound of all. Kenji was a sonic archaeologist. That's what he called himself anyway. Officially, he was a field recordist and sound artist, a man whose obsession lay in capturing the unique audio signature of a place, what he termed its terraphony, the sound of the earth itself. He had recorded the glacial groans of the Antarctic ice shelf, the infrasonic hum of the Nazca lines, the ghostly whispers of wind through the Chernobyl exclusion zone. His work wasn't about capturing birdsong or babbling brooks. It was about capturing the soul of a location, its unheard history, its ambient trauma. His studio in Portland, Oregon was a temple to sound, walls lined with acoustic foam, cables coiling like sleeping serpents, and a central console that looked like the flight deck of a starship. On his monitors, waveforms danced like ethereal specters, the visual representation of a world most people only ignored. It was during a late-night trawl through obscure historical forums that he first found it, a fleeting mention in a post about Haikyo, the Japanese art of exploring ruins. The post spoke of Hashima Island, the abandoned coal mining colony off the coast of Nagasaki. Most of the world knew it as Gunkanjima, or Battleship Island, a concrete leviathan left to rot in the East China Sea. It had gained a sliver of fame as a villain's lair in a James Bond film, a photogenic spectacle of urban decay. But this post spoke of something else. It wasn't about the crumbling seawall or the vine-choked high-rises. It was about a sound. The anonymous poster, claiming to be the son of a former maintenance worker who serviced the tourist boats, wrote of nights when the island hummed. Not the wind, not the sea, but a low subterranean vibration that seemed to rise from the sealed mine shafts deep beneath the waves. He described it as a deep, sorrowful drone, a sound that made the fillings in his teeth ache. He said the older fishermen from the mainland refused to approach the island after dark, whispering of Jime Tanko no Unari, the groan of the undersea mine. For Kenji, this was the siren call, a sound born of pressure, darkness, and history, a terraphonic anomaly, the ultimate prize. Getting permission was a bureaucratic nightmare that took him 6 months of persistent, near-obsessive effort. Day trips to Hashima were common, tightly controlled tours along roped-off pathways. But an overnight stay, alone, with professional recording equipment, it was unheard of, a logistical and safety impossibility. The Nagasaki prefectural office denied him 3 times. Kenji, however, was a master of his craft, and his craft included persuasion. He framed his project not as a ghost hunt, but as a historical preservation initiative. He would create an acoustic museum, a sonic archive of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, capturing its decay before it was lost to the elements forever. He leveraged his minor academic celebrity, his portfolio of critically acclaimed work, and finally a substantial donation to the Cultural Preservation Fund. He received a single 24-hour permit, 1 cycle of the sun. He would be dropped off at dusk and picked up at dusk the next day. He had to sign a stack of waivers thick enough to stop a bullet, absolving the government of any responsibility should he fall into a sinkhole, get brained by falling concrete, or simply lose his mind. He signed every page without reading the fine print. The sound was calling, and he was already on his way. Part 1. The Concrete Necropolis. The boat ride from Nagasaki was a study in contrasts. The city, a vibrant tapestry of light and life rebuilt from atomic ash, slowly receded, replaced by the steely, unforgiving gray of the open sea. His guide and escort, a stern, wiry man from the prefectural office named Mr. Sato, had said little since they left the pier. His silence was heavier than any conversation. He looked at Kenji's gleaming pelican cases, filled with microphones, preamps, and parabolic dishes, with a mixture of suspicion and pity. "The island is not a playground, Tanaka-san," Sato said, finally, his voice raspy from the sea salt. And, Kenji suspected, 1,000 cigarettes. "The structures are unstable. The ground is treacherous. You must stay on the designated paths. This is not a request." "I understand completely, Sato-san," Kenji replied, his Japanese polite but firm. "My work is non-invasive. I am here to listen, not to disturb." Sato grunted, unconvinced. And then it appeared. A silhouette on the horizon, at first indistinct, then sharpening into a jagged, brutalist nightmare. Hashima didn't look like an island. It looked like a fossilized monster, a concrete battleship, run aground and left to die. High-rise apartment blocks, packed together like teeth in a skull, clawed at the sky. A towering headframe for the mine shaft stood like a gallows against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. There was no green, no softness. It was an aberration of concrete and iron, surrounded by a churning, angry sea. The name Battleship Island was an understatement. This was a prison built to look like a ship, forever anchored in its own misery. The boat's engine whined as it navigated the treacherous currents near the shore, finally docking at a small rusted pier. The moment Kenji stepped onto the island, the air changed. It became thick, heavy, tasting of brine, rust, and something else. Something ancient and sorrowful, like the dust from a disturbed tomb. The omnipresent sound of the waves crashing against the seawall was a constant, percussive roar. Sato gave him a final, cursory tour of the safe zone. This was the elementary school, he said, pointing a weathered finger at a hollowed-out concrete shell. And that, Block 65, was the tallest residential building in Japan at the time, a city in the sea. 10,000 people lived here, a complete world. Kenji looked at the rows of black, empty windows. They stared back like the vacant eyes of 1,000 corpses. He could almost see the ghosts of laundry fluttering from the balconies, hear the phantom chatter of children in the schoolyard. But there was nothing, only the wind and the waves. As the sun bled out on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that made the ruins seem to stretch and writhe, Sato prepared to leave. "You have a satellite phone," he stated, not asked. "Emergency only. The pickup boat will be here at 1800 hours tomorrow. Do not be late. And Tanaka-san, do not go near the mines." He gestured toward a section of the island that was cordoned off with heavy chains and faded warning signs. "The ground there is hollow. The shafts go down over a kilometer, deep under the seabed. It is forbidden. It is death." Kenji nodded, his heart hammering with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "I will be careful." Sato looked at him one last time, a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. "Some things are better left unheard," he said before climbing back onto the boat. As the vessel's engine faded into the distance, a profound and absolute silence descended upon Hashima, a silence so total, it felt like a physical pressure. Kenji Tanaka was alone, or so he thought. He began his work with methodical precision, a ritual to ward off the encroaching dread. First, he set up his base in a relatively stable-looking concrete chamber that might have once been a foreman's office. He unpacked his equipment, the familiar clicks and snaps of the cases, a small comfort in the oppressive quiet. He placed his primary stereo pair of omnidirectional microphones on a high stand in the center of a small debris-strewn plaza, hoping to capture the island's general ambiance. He then took his prized possession, a custom-built geophone, a device designed to pick up seismic vibrations, and coupled it directly to the concrete ground with a special acoustic gel. If there was a hum from the earth, this would hear it. Finally, he put on his headphones, sealing himself off from the direct sound of the wind and waves, and plugged into his field recorder. He closed his eyes. Listen. At first, it was exactly what he expected. The low-frequency rumble of the sea, a physical presence that vibrated through the ground and into his bones. The high-frequency whistle of wind whipping through the skeletal remains of window frames, playing the ruined buildings like a vast, discordant flute. The occasional creak of rusting metal, the skittering of unseen debris. It was the soundscape of decay, beautiful in its own desolate way. He let the recording run, archiving the island's slow, steady surrender to entropy. Hours passed. The moon, a pale, sickly crescent, rose over the sea, casting the concrete jungle in a ghostly, monochromatic light. The temperature dropped. Kenji, wrapped in a thermal jacket, sat motionless, a statue of patience, his entire consciousness focused on the stream of audio feeding into his ears. And then around 2 a.m., he heard it. It started subtly, at the very edge of his perception, a frequency so low it was more felt than heard. A subharmonic drone, a B-flat so deep it seemed to resonate with the core of the planet. It wasn't the sea. It wasn't the wind. This was different. It was steady, rhythmic. Vroom, vroom. The needle on his geophone's input level began to twitch, confirming it wasn't his imagination. The sound was coming from the ground beneath him. The jime tanko no unari. The groan of the undersea mine. A cold thrill, part terror, part elation, shot through him. He cranked the gain, his fingers trembling slightly. The sound grew in his headphones, filling his head. It was a mournful, mechanical sound, like a colossal, sleeping machine dreaming of its long-lost purpose. He spent the next hour trying to triangulate the source, moving a sensitive shotgun microphone around, pointing it at different parts of the island. The sound was everywhere, a blanket of sonic dread, but it seemed stronger in one direction, the direction Mr. Sato had warned him about, toward the mines. The cacophony of the damned. Logic, reason, and every self-preservation instinct screamed at him to stay put. He had his recording, the proof. The primary objective was complete. He could pack up, wait for dawn, and leave with a career-defining piece of audio. But the sound was a hook in his soul. It wasn't just a hum anymore. As he listened, his mind, honed by years of identifying subtle acoustic details, began to dissect the noise. Layered within the fundamental drone were other things. Faint, rhythmic clicks. Click, click, click-clack. The sound of a pickaxe striking coal. There was a distant metallic screech like a minecart on rusted rails. A low, percussive thud like a stamp mill crushing rock. These were ghost sounds, acoustic echoes trapped in the rock, replaying a century of toil. The island wasn't just humming, it was remembering. His scientific curiosity had now curdled into something far more primal. A desperate, horrifying need to understand. He left the bulk of his equipment at the base camp, taking only a portable recorder, his headphones, and a powerful flashlight. He unhooked the heavy chain at the entrance to the forbidden zone, the clatter of the links against the concrete sounding like a gunshot in the dead of night. He stepped into the darkness. This part of the island was different. The decay was more profound, the sense of danger palpable. The ground was a treacherous landscape of rubble and rebar. He moved slowly, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous swath through the gloom, revealing the monstrous, skeletal form of the main mine headframe. It loomed over him like a silent steel god of death. The sounds grew stronger here. The humming vibrated up through the soles of his boots. He could almost feel it in his teeth, just as the forum post had described. And now, another layer emerged from the sonic tapestry, one that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Whispers. They were at the very edge of intelligibility, faint and sibilant, like steam escaping a cracked pipe. They weren't Japanese. The phonetics were wrong. He heard the hard consonants of Korean, the tonal lilts of Mandarin. He couldn't make out words, only the cadence of desperation. The whispers of the forced laborers, the Chinese and Korean prisoners who were worked to death in these tunnels during the war. Kenji felt his breath catch in his throat. This wasn't a terraphonic phenomenon anymore. This was a haunting. His flashlight beam fell upon a gaping maw in the ground, the entrance to the Yashima shaft. It was sealed, not with a modern gate, but with a wall of crumbling brick and mortar, a hasty final act of closure. A large, rusted sign, its red paint faded to a bloody pink, read, Lichu Kinshi, Tachi Iri Kinshi. Keep out. But the sound was loudest here. It was pouring out of the cracks in the brickwork, a torrent of invisible energy. He knelt, placing his ear near a fissure in the decaying mortar. The hum was a roar. The clicks of the pickaxes were like gunshots, and the whispers. They were no longer whispers. They were a chorus of faint, overlapping voices, a tapestry of misery. He could hear coughing, a dry, rattling sound that spoke of lungs full of coal dust. He could hear weeping, not loud or performative, but the quiet, hopeless sobbing of broken men. And beneath it all, a single, repeated word, a desperate plea in Korean. Mul, mul, water. Kenji scrambled back, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He felt a sudden, irrational claustrophobia, as if the weight of the mountain and the sea above the tunnels was pressing down on him. He was listening to the acoustic residue of unimaginable suffering. The island hadn't just metabolized the stories. It was endlessly replaying them, a closed loop of torment. He knew he should run, flee back to the safety of his camp, back to the light. But the artist in him, the obsessive, was in control now. He had to get a clean recording. He had to capture this. He fumbled with his portable recorder, attaching a contact microphone to the brick wall. The device would pick up the vibrations directly, filtering out the wind. He slipped his headphones back on and hit record. The sound that flooded his ears was no longer a collection of distinct noises. It was a single, unified wall of sound, a cacophony of pure agony. The humming, the clanking, the weeping, the pleas, they all merged into one overwhelming auditory assault. It was the sound of 1,000 souls screaming at once, a scream that had been resonating in the dark for over 70 years. His vision swam. The flashlight beam danced erratically. The world dissolved into pure, terrifying noise. He felt a phantom pressure on his chest, the phantom sting of dust in his lungs. He could taste coal and despair. He wasn't just listening to the past, he was experiencing it. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din, sharp and immediate. Scrape. It wasn't from his headphones, it was from behind him. Kenji ripped the headphones off his head, his own ragged breathing loud in the sudden relative quiet. The world was just the wind and the sea again. He spun around, shining his flashlight into the oppressive darkness of the ruined complex behind him. Nothing. Just piles of rubble and the skeletal silhouettes of decaying structures. He told himself it was a loose piece of metal, shifted by the wind, a rat, anything rational. He turned back to the sealed mine entrance, his light falling upon the crumbling brickwork. And his blood ran cold. There was a scratch mark on the bricks that hadn't been there before. A long, fresh gouge in the grime and moss, as if someone had dragged a fingernail across it. Scrape. Clatter. This time the sound was closer, to his left. From inside the shell of what looked like a bathhouse, its walls pocked with gaping holes. He swung his light toward the sound. For a split second, the beam illuminated a shape in one of the dark window openings. A gaunt, human-like silhouette, impossibly thin, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. It was there for an instant, a blink and you'll miss it flicker, and then it was gone. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. The rational mind of Kenji Tanaka, the sound engineer, vaporized. All that was left was a terrified animal. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his equipment, and ran. He didn't look back. He sprinted blindly through the debris field, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly, creating a dizzying, strobe-like effect. The ruins seemed to lurch and sway around him. He could hear the whispers again, but this time they weren't in his headphones. They were in the air, carried on the wind, swirling around him. They felt closer, more malicious. He stumbled, his ankle twisting on a loose piece of concrete, and fell hard, his chin smashing against the ground. His precious recorder flew from his grasp, skittering across the rubble. Pain lanced up his leg. He rolled over, propping himself up on his elbows, a sob of terror caught in his throat. His flashlight, which he'd managed to hold onto, now pointed back the way he had come. And in its steady beam, standing not 20 yards away at the edge of the darkness, was a figure. It was skeletal, covered in what looked like a film of black dust. Its clothes were tattered rags that clung to its emaciated frame. It wasn't moving, just standing there, its head cocked to one side as if listening. It had no discernible face, just a dark, hollow-like depression where features should have been. And from that hollow, Kenji could feel, more than hear, a single malevolent thought. You heard us. Now, you are one of us. He let out a choked scream. With a surge of pure adrenaline, he ignored the searing pain in his ankle and lunged for his recorder. He grabbed it and scrambled away, half crawling, half running, like a wounded crab. He didn't dare look back to see if it was following. He could feel its presence behind him, a cold spot in the air, a weight on his soul. He finally burst out of the forbidden zone, back into the relative safety of the main plaza. He didn't stop until he reached his base camp, collapsing inside the concrete chamber, his back slamming against the wall. He sat there in the dark, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably, clutching the recorder to his chest like a holy relic. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, listening. The terrifying whispers were gone. The hum from the earth was still there, but it seemed to have receded, returning to its deep, mournful drone. He had trespassed. He had listened to something not meant for living ears, and the island, and the souls trapped within it, had noticed. Part 3. The Sound He Carried Home. Dawn was a salvation. The first sliver of gray light on the horizon was the most beautiful thing Kenji had ever seen. It didn't warm the island. The concrete seemed to suck all heat from the world, but it banished the deepest of the shadows, and with them the absolute terror of the night. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat with his back to the wall, his injured ankle propped up on a case, and waited. Every creak of the wind, every distant crash of a wave, sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. He kept thinking he saw movement at the edge of his vision, a fleeting, dark shape in a hollowed-out window. When Mr. Sato's boat finally appeared at the pier at 6 p.m., Kenji was already there, his equipment packed, his face a pale, haggard mask. He limped towards the boat, a man who had aged a decade in a single night. Sato took one look at him and knew. The guide's stern facade cracked, replaced by a deep, weary resignation. "You went to the mines," he said. It wasn't a question. Kenji just nodded, unable to speak. Sato helped him onto the boat, his grip surprisingly strong. "Many have been lost on that island," he said quietly as the boat pulled away, the concrete battleship receding once more. Not their bodies, their minds. The coal was not the only thing it took from people. It takes echoes. The journey back was silent. Kenji clutched the portable recorder, his knuckles white. He had it. He had the recording from the very mouth of hell. Back in the sterile safety of his hotel room in Nagasaki, he found the courage to look at the recorder. The file was there, time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. He plugged in his best pair of noise-canceling headphones, took a deep breath, and pressed play. He expected the cacophony, the wall of sonic misery. He expected the whispers, the clanking, the screams. But the recording was silent. Not just quiet. It was absolute digital silence. A flat line. He checked the input levels on the file's metadata. They were maxed out. The device had recorded something. It had captured a signal so intense, it had overloaded the sensors. But there was no sound. Nothing. He felt a wave of dizzying confusion, followed by a strange, hollow relief. Maybe he had imagined it all. The stress, the isolation, the power of suggestion. Perhaps his mind had simply snapped. He packed the recorder away, went home to Portland, and tried to forget. He tried to immerse himself in his work, in the clean, predictable sounds of his studio. He tried to convince himself that Hashima was just a story, a frightening experience that his own imagination had embellished. But the island wasn't finished with him. The silence didn't last. It started about a month later, in the dead of night, in the soundproof perfection of his studio. He would hear it, a low, subterranean hum. A B-flat so deep, it vibrated his chair. At first, he thought it was the building's HVAC system, or a passing truck. He used his sensitive equipment to try and locate the source. But there was no source. The sound wasn't in the room, it was in his head. Slowly, over the next few months, the other sounds returned. The faint, rhythmic click, 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 clack of a phantom pickaxe. The distant, desperate whispers when the house was quiet. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the Korean word for water echoing in his mind. Mole, mole. He saw specialists, audiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists. They found nothing wrong. His hearing was perfect. His brain scans were normal. They diagnosed him with auditory pareidolia, stress-induced tinnitus, the sonic equivalent of seeing faces in the clouds. They gave him medication, which did nothing. He knew what it was. He hadn't just recorded the sound of Hashima, he had absorbed it. The recording wasn't on the device. The island had recorded itself onto him. The silence on the file was the final cruel joke. The sound was never meant for technology. It was meant for a soul, Kenji Tanaka no longer seeks out the world's silent places. He lives in a world where there is no silence. The city noise, the music, the chatter of people, it's all just a temporary mask. In the quiet moments, in the space between heartbeats, the island is always there. The groan of the undersea mine is the new baseline of his existence. He is a living archive of a forgotten agony. He carries the terraphonic scream of Hashima Island inside him, a ghost in his ears, a permanent echo in the hollow chambers of his own mind. And some nights when the hum is particularly loud, he looks into the mirror and doesn't see his own face. He sees a dark, hollow depression where his features should be, and he feels a cold, terrifying understanding. He heard them, and now he is one of them. Story: The Thirst of Echoes. The first thing that hits you about Nagasaki isn't the history, it's the heat. In August, it's a physical presence, a wet, heavy blanket that smothers you the moment you step outside. It seeps into your clothes, slicks your skin with a perpetual film of sweat, and makes the air shimmer above the asphalt. The cicadas provide the soundtrack, a relentless, high-pitched scream that drills into your skull from dawn until dusk. It's a sound of life, so fervent and desperate it feels like it's trying to drown out a silence that has lingered for decades. I was a photographer, or at least that's what I told myself. In reality, I was a journeyman with a decent eye and a mountain of debt, chasing assignments for travel magazines that paid just enough to keep me moving. The job in Nagasaki was supposed to be easy, vibrant port city, where history meets modernity. That was the working title. I was to capture the colorful streetcars, the fusion architecture of the Dejima Wharf, the smiling faces of tourists at Glover Garden. Cheerful, digestible, forgettable. But Nagasaki doesn't let you forget. My editor, a man named Henderson who communicated exclusively in brisk, impersonal emails, had suggested I get some panoramic shots of the city. Find a high point, kid. The view from Mount Inasa is classic, but try somewhere else. Be original. Originality led me to Kazugashira Hill. It wasn't as high as Inasa, but the locals said the view was more intimate. You can feel the city's heart from there, an old woman at a noodle shop told me, her voice a papery whisper. The park at its summit was a quiet, unassuming place with a statue of Sakamoto Ryoma, the samurai visionary, staring out over the harbor with bronze, unblinking eyes. My first visit was purely professional. I went in the late afternoon, hoping for the golden hour light that makes even the most mundane cityscape look poetic. The heat was starting to break, and a faint breeze rustled the leaves of the camphor trees. It was peaceful. I framed my shots, the sprawling city below, the elegant curve of the Megami Bridge, the industrial cranes of the Mitsubishi shipyard, standing like skeletal sentinels. I took dozens of photos, packed my gear, and left, thinking nothing of it. The photos were good. Henderson would be pleased. It was during my second visit, a few days later, that the feeling began. I'd gone back to try and capture the city at twilight, the moment when the lights begin to pepper the darkening landscape like fallen stars. The park was deserted this time, save for a few stray cats that watched me with wary indifference. The cicadas had fallen silent, replaced by the chirping of evening crickets. A profound quiet settled over the hill, a silence that felt older and deeper than the mere absence of noise. I was setting up my tripod near a stone bench when I saw him. He was just a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing near the edge of the overlook, a short distance from the Ryoma statue. He was looking down at the city, his back to me. The first thing I noticed, the detail that snagged in my mind, was his hat. It was a stark, white bucket-style hat, the kind school children wear. It seemed impossibly clean, almost luminous in the fading light. He was wearing shorts and a simple short-sleeved shirt. He was perfectly still. My first thought was annoyance. He was in my shot. I cleared my throat, a soft, polite sound. "Excuse me, son." He didn't move. He didn't even seem to register my presence. I figured he was lost in thought, or maybe didn't speak English. I waited a minute, then another. The light was perfect, and he was ruining it. I sighed and decided to reframe, moving my tripod a few feet to the left. When I looked up from the viewfinder, he was gone. Not walking away, not running off, just gone. The space where he had stood was empty. I scanned the small park. There was nowhere to go. The path leading down the hill was a good 50 yards away, and the slope was too steep and overgrown to scramble down. He couldn't have vanished that quickly. A chill, completely at odds with the humid air, crawled up my spine. The crickets had stopped. The silence was back, and this time, it felt like a physical weight pressing in on my eardrums. I shook my head, my rational mind scrambling for an explanation. He must have been a fast runner. He must have ducked behind the statue's plinth. I walked over, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the gravel path. There was no one there. I packed my gear, with fumbling, hurried movements. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck that made me want to run. I didn't look back as I half-walked, half-jogged down the winding path to the street below, the oppressive quiet chasing me all the way. Back in my sterile business hotel, I chalked it up to fatigue and the disorienting effect of twilight, a trick of the light, a kid who knew the hill better than I did. I tried to put it out of my mind. I spent the next day at the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. You think you're prepared for a place like that. You've seen the pictures, you've read the history. You are not prepared. The museum is a tomb and a testament, a place of sacred silence, where the only sounds are the hushed footsteps of visitors and the occasional choked-back sob. It's not the statistics that break you, the 74,000 dead, the 75,000 injured. It's the artifacts. A child's tricycle, twisted and scorched into a monstrous, unrecognizable shape. A lunchbox, still filled with carbonized rice. A piece of a wall with the shadow of a person vaporized against it. A permanent, ghostly stain. And the photographs of the victims, their skins sloughing off in great burned sheets, their eyes wide with a horror no human should ever witness. I saw a display case dedicated to the clothing worn that day. And there, under the soft gallery lighting, was a child's hat. It was a white bucket hat, identical to the one I'd seen on the hill. The placard explained it was a common part of the primary school uniform in 1945. My breath caught in my throat. I walked through the rest of the exhibit in a daze, the air thick with unspoken grief. I came to a section detailing the immediate aftermath, the peak of dawn, the flash boom, the black rain, and the desperate dying pleas of the survivors. A quote from a survivor, seared into a plaque, jumped out at me. Everywhere there were voices, weak, like insects. Mizu, Mizu kudasai. Water, water please. They were burning from the inside out. Their throats were fused shut. But still they begged for water. The words chilled me to the bone. I left the museum feeling hollowed out, as if a part of me had been scooped away and replaced with cold, heavy dread. The cheerful, vibrant city I was supposed to be documenting suddenly felt like a thin, fragile veneer stretched over an abyss of suffering. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scream of the cicadas outside my window sounded different now. Less like a celebration of life, and more like a chorus of agony. I kept seeing the boy on the hill in my mind's eye, his still figure, his impossibly white hat. My journalistic curiosity, or perhaps some darker, more morbid compulsion, took over. I started digging. I spent hours online, falling down rabbit holes of local forums and ghost story websites, my clumsy Japanese translations aided by Google. The legend of Kazagashira Hill wasn't a secret. It was a local ghost story, an urban legend whispered among teenagers and shared by grandparents as a cautionary tale. They called him Shiroiboshi no Shonen, the boy in the white hat. The stories varied in the details, but the core was always the same. A young boy is seen on the hill, usually at dusk or dawn. He stands silently, looking out over the city. Sometimes, he's just a fleeting presence. Other times he turns, and his face is a blur, or worse, a scarred and burned visage of unimaginable pain. In some versions, he whispers a single word, Mizu, water. The legends all agreed on his origin. He was a ghost from the bomb. One of the countless children who had been at school or playing outside when the sky split open at 11:02 a.m. on August 9th, 1945. Kazagashira Hill, being one of the higher points, was a place many survivors tried to flee to, hoping to escape the fires that consumed the Urakami Valley below. Most of them died on the way, their bodies ravaged by heat and radiation. They died of thirst. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. This was insane. I was a rational man, a man who dealt in the tangible world of light and shadow, f-stops and shutter speeds. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the coincidence of the hat, the story, the overwhelming feeling of wrongness on that hill, it was too much to dismiss. I had to go back. I had to know. This time, I planned it. I would go late, long after any tourist or local would have reason to be there. I chose a night with a full moon, hoping its pale light would offer some comfort. It didn't.
The taxi driver gave me a strange look when I told him my destination.
Kazagashira Koen? So late? He asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror.
I'm a photographer, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I want to capture the city lights. He nodded slowly, but his skepticism was palpable. He dropped me at the base of the hill, and the moment his taillights disappeared around a curve, the oppressive silence descended once more. It was a living thing, broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps on the path. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers, a cloyingly sweet odor that reminded me of a funeral home. As I neared the summit, I could feel the temperature drop. Not a refreshing coolness, but a dead, unnatural cold that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. My camera bag felt like it was full of lead. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee this place of profound sorrow. But I pushed on. The park was bathed in the ghostly silver of the moonlight. The statue of Ryoma cast a long, distorted shadow that looked like a gallows. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. I scanned the overlook. It was empty. A wave of relief, so powerful it made me dizzy, washed over me. It was just a story. I was an idiot, spooked by a museum exhibit and some local folklore. I let out a shaky breath and unzipped my camera bag, the sound of the zipper ripping through the silence, like a scream. I would take one damn picture and get the hell out of here. I raised the camera to my eye, focusing on the glittering tapestry of the city below. Through the lens, the world seemed safe, contained. Then I heard it. A sound so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, dry cough, just behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I didn't want to turn around. I have never, in my entire life, been so paralyzed by fear. My mind was a screaming vortex of denial and terror. It's a cat. It's the wind. It's nothing. Slowly, fighting every primal urge for self-preservation, I lowered my camera and turned. He was there. He stood, not 10 feet away, near the stone bench. The boy in the white hat. The moonlight bleached all color from the scene, making him look like an old, faded photograph. His white hat was a beacon in the gloom. He wasn't looking at the city this time. He was looking directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly. It was cast in deep shadow by the brim of his hat, but I could feel his gaze, an intense, ancient sorrow that pierced right through me. The cold intensified, radiating from him in waves. My breath plumed in front of my face. We stood there for an eternity, locked in a silent tableau. Me, the intruder with my modern technology and shallow purpose. Him, the eternal witness. A fixed point of grief in a world that had moved on. My photographer's instinct, buried deep beneath layers of terror, surfaced. This was the shot. The ghost story made real. The kind of paranormal evidence people build careers on. My hands, trembling violently, moved on their own, raising the camera. I fumbled with the settings, my fingers numb and clumsy. I peered through the viewfinder, trying to frame his small, still form. The camera wouldn't focus. The display flickered, the autofocus hunting back and forth, unable to lock onto him. It was as if he was made of something other than light and matter, something my lens couldn't comprehend. Frustrated and panicked, I switched to manual focus, my thumb spinning the ring. The image blurred, then sharpened. I could see him more clearly now. His small hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. His uniform, which had looked so clean from a distance, was tattered and stained with something dark. And then he moved. He took a single shuffling step toward me, then another. He moved with a horrifying, unnatural gait, like a puppet with tangled strings. With each step, another sound reached me, a dry, rasping, clicking sound. He lifted his head, and his face came out of the shadows and into the direct light of the moon. The scream that clawed its way up my throat died before it could escape. It was a soundless, primal shriek of pure horror. His face. There are no words in any language to adequately describe the atrocity of his face. It was a landscape of a nightmare. The skin on one side was a waxy, melted ruin, fused into the fabric of his shirt collar. One eye was a milky, unseeing orb. The other was wide, black, and bottomless, filled with an agony that was 70 years old and still burning. His lips were gone, peeled back from his teeth in a permanent, horrific grin. The skin of his cheeks was blackened and peeling, revealing the raw, red tissue underneath. He was a perfect, horrific preservation of a single moment of hell on earth. He took another step closer. The rasping, clicking sound was coming from his throat. He was trying to speak. His ruined mouth worked, the blackened flesh cracking around it. A single word, a dry, agonizing whisper escaped his throat. It was the sound of sand scraping against bone. Mizu. Water. He held out a small burned hand. It wasn't a threat, it was a plea. A plea that had been echoing on this hill for 3/4 of a century. In that moment, the horror was eclipsed by a sorrow so vast and profound, it felt like it would drown me. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't a malevolent spirit. This was a child. A little boy who had died in the most horrible way imaginable. His last sensation a burning, all-consuming thirst. He wasn't haunting the hill. He was trapped there, an echo of pain imprinted on the very fabric of the place, forever begging for a comfort that would never come. My camera hung uselessly in my hands. To take a picture of this would be the ultimate violation, a desecration of a pain so immense it defied comprehension. It was a sacred horror, and I was a profane intruder. I had a bottle of water in the side pocket of my camera bag. My hand, shaking so badly I could barely control it, pulled it out. I fumbled with the cap, my fingers refusing to obey. Finally, it twisted free. I took a step forward, my legs like lead. I knelt, my knees cracking on the gravel, and extended the bottle toward him. "Here," I whispered, my own voice hoarse. "Here's water." His black, bottomless eye fixed on the bottle. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. A flicker of something, not understanding, not relief, but perhaps a momentary quieting of the endless agony, crossed his ruined features. He didn't take the bottle, he simply faded. Like smoke in the wind, his form grew translucent. The moonlight shone through him, illuminating the statue of Ryoma behind him. The tattered uniform, the white hat, the horrifying face, it all dissolved into the night air, leaving nothing behind but the oppressive silence and the scent of graveyard flowers. And the cold, the deep, deathly cold. I stayed kneeling on the gravel for a long time, the uncapped water bottle still clutched in my trembling hand. The moon tracked its slow path across the sky. Eventually, the first hints of dawn began to soften the eastern horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gray. The crickets started to chirp again. The world was coming back to life. I never took the panoramic shot of the city lights. I deleted the photos I had taken of the hill. When I got back to the States, I sent Henderson a terse email quitting the assignment. I couldn't write about Nagasaki as a vibrant tourist destination. I couldn't package its story for easy consumption. I never became a famous photographer. I put my cameras away for a long time. The memory of what I saw on Kazagashira Hill is not something you frame and hang on a wall. It's something you carry inside you, a cold, heavy weight in your soul.
Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I can still hear it. That dry, desperate whisper, carried on the wind from half a world away. A sound that is not a memory, but an echo. The echo of a little boy in a white hat, forever standing on a lonely hill, overlooking a city that chose to live. Forever trapped in the last burning moment of his life. Forever asking for a single drop of water to quench a thirst that fire and time can never extinguish.
Mizu,